This next section of Wormeli's book that we read is on differentiating for teens, and for tweens, I should say. And so I'm going to be talking about differentiation in the classroom and how Wormeli feels about it and how I feel about it. So immediately, one of the first things that jumps out at me is on page 145, he says, if we don't create an environment that responds to students' developmental needs, effects of differentiation will be significantly muted. So that wasn't a direct quote, but I think it's really important that we are creating environments that respond to students' developmental needs, and I think that's often forgotten in a middle school and a junior high, because you see them and they're growing and they're tall, and you don't realize that they're still, some of them are 12 and they're kids and they're 11, 12, 13, 14-year-olds, and developmentally they need things that are different in elementary and different in high school. So you have to make that blend and have an environment that's blended enough to where they can grow and develop, but they also are, the adolescent mind can be cultivated. So that's like the first thing that stuck out to me. He mentions that you need physical activity and creative expression, structure and limits, and having that space for creativity, like in elementary school, is important. Having that physical activity, like in elementary school, is important. But also having a structure and limits so that they are prepared for high school when it is just like full of structure and limits. In talking about that need for physical activity, even in the classroom, I started to wonder, there's like this whole section on 146 where he talks about how they need more than just like walking between classes, that they need basically a recess and they need to move around. And with COVID, I know, at least in the school I'm in, they can't get into groups, right, because of COVID, and they don't have a recess, and they can't go and hang out at lunch because they have to eat lunch with us. And so I'm wondering, how much is COVID affecting this need and desire to be physically active during the class day and just during the day in general? I wonder how much that's affecting the adolescent mind, right? So how much of their learning is being inhibited from COVID, and how much of it is coming from their inability to be able to move around and to group and to collaborate and to be active in the classroom. He's talking about these physical activities that they need, and they need to collaborate, and they need creativity. And I start to wonder, he gives all these examples of things that he does, and some of them would be really cool for like when I worked at Hammond and it was smaller, but a lot of them, I'm not sure how. I have here a note, again, cool idea, but how do you put into practice? I feel it's like the whole school would need to get on board with some of these things in order for it to work, because if it's just you driving home differentiation and no one else is doing it, then how are your students even learning? They might just be learning in your class, but learning happens all throughout the day, so they're just going to be one step forward, two steps back, one step forward, two steps back. And also there are a lot of things, it's asking teachers to do a lot of things. Focus on the gifted students, focus on the low-level students, focus on those who are challenged. You might have IEPs, you might have 504s. And it seems like there's a lot of stuff we have to factor in before teaching, one class. And the classes we're teaching here, like Rachel has 94 core students. How is she supposed to differentiate for 94 students? That's insane, right? And we have some students on a first grade reading level, and we have some students on a 12th grade reading level, and they're not in the same class, but that's got to be mentally taxing as a teacher to have to figure out all of these different things that you have to do for these kids, and you want to reach them, and you know that differentiation is important, but then sometimes you just need to lecture. And so it started to get overwhelming to read it, because you know what you need to do, and then you look at the material and you think, I've just got to get through it, and it feels like here at this school right now, we're just getting through it, we're just powering through grammar, and if the kids don't get it, then we have to power through, and everything's on a slideshow, and it's getting really frustrating sometimes to try to figure out, how am I going to reach the kid who needs me to tell him everything, while also having students who need to be reading it on the paper and they need to be writing it. And I can see that it's important, and I know that it's important, but I can also see that it's not always put into practice, I guess is the right way to say it. He also makes this point about how in differentiation, it allows students to kind of track on their own sometimes. And so if you're really growing and understanding the material and mastering it, you get to move on. And if you aren't, you get to stay and, work through some stuff. But it's interesting because he says, in life, let me read it. It says, Just as we would never demand that all humans be able to recite the alphabet fluently on the first Monday after their third birthday, it goes against all we know about teaching tweens to mandate that all students master slope and y-intercept during the first week of October in 7th grade. Except for, I kind of feel like the standards do that. Like, it doesn't say exactly like first week in October, but it definitely still requires that you know this material by this time and that this is how you're supposed to develop. When in reality, people are so varying and different that there's no way. So I agree with him, but I also am like, how am I supposed to implement your thoughts and ideas in a system that does not feel the same way as you? Which goes back to, it needs to be like the whole school, we need a whole system reboot. But if this is where we are, what I would love in this chapter that I haven't really found yet is how do we take your like really great ideas that are improbable and impractical with the system that we have? How do we scale your ideas down and improve the system enough to where they can match and we can make an effective learning environment for these students? Because I feel like his ideas are really great and they make sense, but having 94 students and varying levels and all these standards and all these, the school to watch, all of this stuff that you have to do and mandate and one book, one school, all these other little things that are getting in the way of us just like teaching the kids what they need to know. So if we could take his ideas and, figure out how to mesh them in with what's going on, all those extra bits, then maybe our kids can we can differentiate in the classroom enough to where our kids know what's going on. But as of right now, I'm personally struggling a little bit with it. So I would like to know if he worked in a private school. I should probably just give him a good Google and find out. But for differentiation, you got to meet the kids where they are, and you got to try to help different learners learn in different ways. And I think that's something that if you're not trained in adolescent development, or really, if you just have like a general education degree as opposed to like teaching, pedagogy, whatever, you might not realize that when you're in middle school, you learn different and you're still trying to figure out how you learn and how you study and how you test. And so, it's a rough time. And so differentiation's really key in this classroom. And Wormeli agrees. Obviously, I'm struggling with it in my classroom and with the school. So big school, lots of red tape, and there's just a lot. But I appreciate the idea of differentiation. I think it's also something that we are struggling with in the graduate school at Converse because we're being educated, we're being taught how to teach middle schoolers, but we're not being taught how to teach middle schoolers, if that makes sense. So we have professors teaching us, oh, this is how you're supposed to teach middle school. You're supposed to differentiate. You're supposed to do this. You're supposed to do this. Be active, move around, collaborate, be creative. And then we're not being active. We're not collaborating. We're not being creative. And so I think it's hard because you're trying to like watch teachers model, but they're not modeling what they're saying. And I'm not like talking trash, I promise. Just in general, if you're it's hard to go. And I know different teachers have different like ways of delivering things. I'm different than Miss Rose. Miss Rose is different than Miss Matheson and Miss Gobert. But it's hard because I'm trying to like, oh, maybe in this class I'll see how it works, and maybe I just need like a more clearly defined like, look, this is differentiation. Watch what I do. And Wormeli mentions that. He said it's really hard, or maybe not Wormeli, maybe one of the articles I read, someone mentions that it's hard to do research on differentiation because it comes in so many shapes and sizes, which is true. So I think there would be a way to do it, right? Because you could just straight lecture to one class and then deliver like a full differentiated lesson to another class and see who passes the test, right? If they have the same ability level or the same skills or whatever. I don't know. Sometimes I get frustrated because I'm like, if I need to do these things, I need to see how they're done, so that I need scaffolding, I need modeling. But Wormeli doesn't mention that explicitly for educators. It's more of like, you should do it for your kids, but I need someone to do it for me. With that being said, I did want to say thank you again for letting me do this instead of writing something. Very much appreciated. And I feel like a huge takeaway from this chapter is being trained in adolescent development. So whether that's your degree in undergrad is focusing more on middle school, or you get a postgraduate degree, master's degree in middle level education. I think that being aware and educated on what adolescents need is very integral, very important. Sorry, my gum. Very important for middle level educators because their brains and their bodies, they're all so different from the wee little lambs in elementary school and then the big kids in high school. And I think that one of the driving home pieces for this chapter, the one that I took, is being educated in adolescent development is absolutely important because then you know how to differentiate and why to differentiate and what to do and how to do it. And I think that is the main takeaway.